colleagues for bailing on the deal that they wanted back in January.
It is interesting. Republicans 4 months ago would not give funding for Ukraine, for Israel, and for our southern border because we demanded changes in policy. So we actually locked arms together and said, we're not going to give you money for this. We want a change in law. And now it's interesting, a few months later, when we're finally getting to the end, they're like, oh, just kidding. I actually don't want a change in law because it's a presidential election year.
So if you're following along, Republicans got almost everything they wanted in this bipartisan bill. President Joe Biden was going to sign it into law. But then Trump got mad, so Republicans killed the bill to help Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Donald Trump is now, when he's not busy, peddling dangerous racist lies about Haitian immigrants eating labradoodles or whining about getting impeached over trying to extort Ukraine, as he did today in his meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Well, when he's not doing those things, he's hawking $100,000 watches. The Harris campaign laying out some specific plans to tackle immigration and the border in a brand new ad ahead of her visit today. Watch that.
Kamala Harris has never backed down from a challenge. She put cartel members and drug traffickers behind bars, and she will secure our border. Here's her plan: hire thousands more border agents, enforce the law and step up technology, and stop fentanyl smuggling and human trafficking. We need a leader with a real plan to fix the border, and that's Kamala Harris.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
The vice president getting herself on offense on the issue of immigration with a visit to the southern border is where we start today. Here with me at the table, co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend, Alicia Menendez is back. Also back, the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation and president of the National Action Network. Political columnist and host of the podcast In Politic for Puck is back as well. MSNBC national affairs analyst, that is John Heilman. Heilman, I thought this was Biden's one of the best moments and one of the best State of the Union addresses he's had during his presidency. It was, there was a lot of call and response. There was a lot of President Biden sort of owning the Republicans. But this participation by this very, very conservative Republican who said that is true, I thought was a moment that could sort of make a comeback in the campaign, and Kamala Harris is making sure it does.
Yeah, and look, you couldn't strip that one. I mean, I'm relatively certain that James Lankford was not a planned thing when he did that. That gave his assent to what Joe Biden said. As I'm always inclined to do in these situations, has anybody called Senator Lankford and asked him who he's voting for in the election this year? And I don't know the answer to that question, so I won't impute. But I would, I've not seen him yet endorse Kamala Harris, and it would be an incredible thing if he, at least on this issue, were to speak out and not just mouth words in the Senate chamber. And I bet the Harris campaign has at least asked to try to make that happen.
It's such an interesting point, because if you care about these things, the choice is as stark on the issue of immigration as anything. I mean, she's for doing a bill with so much Republican stuff in it. It's actually difficult for some parts of her coalition.
Indeed, indeed. I think what is interesting here is she knows that she has to go in there and get at this attack that he continues to level against her, that she is not going to be sufficiently strong on the border. So she has to answer that question of strength. And then she needs to show that she has a plan, that she actually has a way of approaching that. Some of that proof is already in the pudding, in the form of what the Biden administration has done just in this past year to increase legal pathways into the United States, which is why we have seen border crossings fall 70% since their peak in December. What they are doing is already working. I would argue, though, that in addition to doing that, in addition to meeting Donald Trump where he is on this argument about the border, that she should go a step further and embrace the duality of saying we can secure our border and we can also protect dreamers, protect DACA recipients, keep American families together, as President Biden and I have been doing in our parole in place policy, where if you are an undocumented person married to an American citizen, you can now have an expedited path in order to be here legally. she can be the candidate who is offering Americans both. And that is, to me, the only way she really gets out ahead of Donald Trump on this issue.
Well, it's so interesting because her campaign has been very adept at weaving the Project 2025 greatest hits into some of their messaging. And some of the most, I mean, I think we did a whole hour over the summer, I think you were there, on the Project 2025 immigration chapter with no other news hook other than we all read it and thought, oh my God.
This is bananas.
It's bananas. And it's some of the most extreme stuff that he's running on in Trump 3.0.
Well, because he let the architect of family separation into some strange test kitchen where he would come up, Stephen Miller, with things that are fundamentally un-American, right? Talking about denaturalizing naturalized American citizens, talking about going into American communities where people sit in the church pew next to you, go to school with your kid, are part of the fabric of your life. And somehow he's going to rip those 11 million people and in many cases send them back to a country where they may not even know the language there. So there is what he has already done, and there is what he is promising to do. And I think part of the task for the Harris campaign is tying those two things together.
It's another example, too, where she's the one standing with the guys in uniforms, in this case, Border Patrol agents.
And I think that's smart because he is trying to miscast her as some far left crazy. And she is not that. She was a prosecutor. He is the prosecuted. And I think that, people need to be reminded of that all the time. But I also think that she should do both and dealing with, she needs to emphasize that the crossings at the border have gone down much further than they were under Trump, who she's running against. She needs to also talk about preserving families. And I would add a dimension, she needs to remind them the reason we want to keep families together and the border crossing down is we see them as human beings, unlike my opponent who thinks some immigrants are eating your cats and dogs. So his policy is not only not working, he dehumanizes people, which is un-American. I would keep in his face what he's been saying about the people that even the Republican governor has denounced about what he said in Springfield, Ohio. Those are immigrants, too. And we cannot lose our humanity as Americans in order to protect our borders. We can do both at the same time.
Especially in the case of Haitians, since we're talking about immigrants who are in this country legally through temporary protected status.
And building businesses and doing well.
Going to church and going to school. And I mean, the thing that I think, I'm sure in Trump world, they think this has been a good stretch for them. They think, I'm sure, that they distracted from her wiping the floor with him in the debate. But I think it's reminded people of what you're talking about, the dehumanization, because you can't be for child separation when you hear the audio. I remember when ProPublica broke this audio of the child separation. And I don't think it was video. It was just the sound of the children wailing. Those were things that were divisive among Republicans at the time. He's brought all that back to the fore.
I think I think we're all horrified by I remember being horrified by that sound also. I'm staggered by the fact that there's this polling that shows that mass deportation is a majority issue in America now. It's incredible. I mean, that 53, I'm looking at this poll just the other day, 54% of Americans are in favor of mass deportation. I mean, it tells you something about the damage that was done to the image that she's contending with now, that Vice President Harris is contending with now, which is that, the border was out of control for a while in the Biden administration, and there are a lot of people who were scared by that, and it was a legitimate issue, and there has been a lot of work that's been done since then to try to get a handle back on that, but the residual effects of that still was what she's contending with. She's contending with the fact that there are people who still think the Democrats are weak on this issue, and I think that that my aspirational side agrees entirely about trying to do both of these things. I think that's in the best interest of America to talk that way. But the thing that a lot of undecided voters, the sliver of people who are going to decide this election, is they still have in their head the very simple thing: Democrats are weak on the border, and she's got to figure out a variety of ways to make it clear that Democrats are stronger than they think, that she will be stronger than they think, and that Donald Trump is the one who's actually weak on this because he stopped this border bill. You have to be on offense on the issue of strength on this. And I'm not sure you get a lot of extra votes I'm fine to say to be in favor of trying to keep families together. I'm for that. But the people who are for all of that are mostly people who are already on the Democratic side. We're talking about the people who are still have seen Trump's inhumane treatment of immigrants and what he proposes to do and are still out there, haven't decided which way they're going to go. Those people are more inclined to want to hear that she will get control of our border. And I think she has a good case to make on that, but that's the case that I think she's going to be making, that she's continuing to make in a strong way.
Well, and here's who she had help her make it at the convention. This is the sheriff.
I mean, look, just like when he killed the border bill, he just made our jobs harder. Now, Kamala, on the other hand, has been fighting border crime for years. She's gone down to Mexico and worked to stop the traffickers. And when the traffickers didn't stop, she put them in jail. Now, down in my neck of the woods, we call that fooling around and finding out. I may be paraphrasing a bit.
And then let me show you how a Democrat ran on that message and prevailed.
Let's be clear. The border is broken. But this year, when Democrats and Republicans worked together to finally write new border laws, we were blocked. We all know who sabotaged us. We reject the divisiveness. We reject the dysfunction. We reject the deception. My Italian grandfather used to toast new couples. He'd say marriage sometimes is hard, but in the end, non ci sono rose senza spine. You can't have the roses without the thorns. You have to work for it. To be a nation of immigrants is hard sometimes, too. You have to work for it. Tonight, we celebrate the roses of life. We come together from every state, from every ethnicity, from every race and religion. We come together tonight to celebrate our candidate, Kamala Harris, who knows America is worth it, who knows this nation, built by immigrants, is a rare and beautiful thing, and who joyfully accepts the challenge to work across party lines to secure our border, to treat people like human beings, and to move our country forward.
Now, to be honest, Howman, he had more time than she does. Your point, I think, is that if David Plouffe is sitting there and has to make some decisions, you cut the ad with the sheriff and make that point.
Yeah, and I think your instinct about this, I think that's the way they're thinking about this, because this is not, at this point, they have a lot of votes that they've persuaded a lot of people who are going to vote for her. Most of the people who are going to be persuaded by, let's call it the liberal side of this debate, are already going for her. It's this I have to always keep thinking about this in this very short period of time we have now, which is, what's the undecided vote? Who are the 5% in battleground states who are still, after all of this, are still in a place where they haven't decided yet? And more likely, those people are going to be people who the ad with the sheriff about how she stands with law enforcement. Mm-hmm. She's helped us secure the border and will be a tough law enforcement. The tough law enforcer from when she was an attorney general in California. That's an image that's more likely to be persuasive with the votes they need that are still available.
May I make a counter argument, which is, I have yet to see, and this is where polling and focus grouping can sometimes be limited, I have yet to see any polling that would suggest that for that crowd, if you go forward with the border security,